Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The kettle clicked off just as I finished wiping the kitchen counter. The quiet hum of the evening filled the house, just the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway and the faint chirp of crickets through the open window. My husband had gone to visit his brother out of town for a few days, and the quiet had stretched longer than I expected. I'm used to being alone sometimes, but that night the silence felt more present. I was pouring my tea when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity tugged harder, and I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked over. Through the frosted glass of the door, I saw a familiar figure shifting on his feet. Peter, my husband's longtime friend. "Peter," I asked as I opened the door, "is everything all right?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hi, Clara. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. I know it's late." I stepped aside, letting him in without another word. "It's fine. Come in. You want some tea?" He nodded, and I led him to the kitchen. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. I'd always known Peter as cheerful, a little loud, full of stories that made you laugh even when you didn't feel like it. But that version of him wasn't standing in my kitchen now. I poured him a cup and slid it across the table. He sat down heavily, shoulders drooping, eyes fixed on the steam curling above the mug. "I won't stay long," he said after a long pause. "I just needed to talk to someone. And you were the only person I could think of." That caught me off guard. Peter had friends, a family, people who adored him. I was just his best friend's wife, someone he saw at barbecues and Christmas dinners. "Well, I'm here," I said gently, settling into the chair across from him. "What's going on?" He didn't answer right away, just held the cup in both hands and stared down at it. The kitchen light was soft, casting a warm glow over the space, and I could hear the soft ticking of the clock, suddenly so loud in the silence between us. "Clara," he began slowly, "have you ever felt like you're just drifting? Like your life looks fine from the outside, but inside, you're somewhere else entirely?" I didn't answer. I knew that feeling too well to brush it off with a polite smile. "I've been going through something," he continued, his voice lower now. "For a while. Years, maybe. I didn't even realize it until recently. Everything just started to feel hollow. I wake up, I go to work, I make small talk, and I come home. I smile, laugh, do all the expected things, but none of it feels real anymore." I watched him closely. He wasn't asking for advice. He just needed to say it out loud, and something about the way he looked at me, like I was the only one who might understand, made me stay quiet and just listen. "My wife thinks I'm fine. Hell, most days I convince myself I'm fine, but I'm not. I feel like I've lost myself somewhere along the way." He looked up then, eyes a little glassy. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected: vulnerability. Honest, raw, and unfiltered. It sat between us like a third presence in the room. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," he said with a sheepish laugh. "Maybe because you always seem grounded, real, like you actually listen." "I do," I said softly. "I'm listening." We sat in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that fills the space with something unspoken and heavy. He took a slow sip of his tea. "When David and I were younger," he said, referring to my husband, "we used to talk for hours about our dreams, about who we wanted to be. Somewhere along the way, those conversations stopped. We stopped dreaming. I miss that, I miss feeling alive." His words stirred something in me, something I hadn't acknowledged in a long time. The quiet ache of routine, of days blending into each other, of growing older and wondering if this was it, if this was all life had left to offer. "You're not alone in that," I said finally. "More of us feel that way than you think." He looked at me then, really looked. "Do you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes, especially lately." We didn't say much more after that. He finished his tea and stood to leave. I walked him to the door, and just before he stepped out, he turned to me. "Thank you," he said, "for listening. I didn't realize how much I needed it." I watched him walk to his car, the porch light casting a soft glow around him. When he drove off, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the night air cool against my skin, the tea still warm in my hand. Something had shifted. I wasn't sure what, but I felt it, like a quiet ripple on still water. The next day, I found myself thinking about Peter more than I expected. His words echoed in my mind, not just what he said, but how he said it, the weariness, the quiet plea behind the confession, and the strange comfort of being seen, even for a moment, by someone who wasn't supposed to matter that much in the grand scheme of things. But sometimes the people who aren't supposed to matter end up showing us the parts of ourselves we'd forgotten were there. A few days passed before I saw him again. I was walking back from the grocery store, bags in hand, when I noticed his car parked in front of our house again. He was sitting inside, hands on the steering wheel, eyes lost in thought. When he saw me, he stepped out quickly and met me at the gate. "Hey," he said, almost shyly. "I was hoping I'd catch you." I raised an eyebrow. "Is everything all right?" He nodded. "Yeah, I wanted to talk again, if that's okay." There was something in his voice that made it hard to say no, so I didn't. We sat on the back patio this time, with the sun just beginning to dip below the trees. The breeze was gentle, and I could smell the faint sweetness of jasmine from the garden. He talked more freely this time, about his childhood, his marriage, the small regrets that piled up over time. I listened, not out of politeness, but because his words struck chords in me I hadn't known were still capable of vibrating. At one point, he paused and looked at me with an intensity that caught me off guard. "I don't know why, but being around you makes it easier to breathe." I didn't know what to say to that. So I smiled, and we sat in that silence again, letting it hold us in a strange, quiet understanding. Something was unfolding between us. I didn't know what it was yet, or where it would lead, but I knew it wasn't nothing. And in a life that often felt like it had too much nothing, that was enough. That evening lingered in my thoughts long after Peter left. I didn't mention it to David when he returned from his trip. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I wasn't sure what it even was. A conversation. A confession. A moment of honesty between two people who had, for so long, only existed on the edges of each other's lives. Peter didn't reach out again for a while. A week passed. Then two. Life settled back into its rhythm. The clinking of breakfast dishes, the weekend errands, the quiet brushing of our teeth side by side. And yet somewhere under that routine, a small current stirred. Then one Saturday afternoon, I was pruning the roses along the side fence when I heard the gate creak open. "Clara?" His voice was softer than usual. I looked up, shielding my eyes from the sun. Peter stood there in a navy jacket, hands in his pockets, looking unsure. "Didn't mean to startle you," he added. "You didn't," I replied, standing up and brushing the dirt from my gloves. "Want to come in?" He hesitated, then nodded. "If you're not busy." We walked around to the patio. This time, I poured lemonade instead of tea, and we settled into the same chairs as before, the late afternoon light slanting through the trees, painting dappled patterns across the table. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said after a long pause. "I didn't want to overstep." "You're not," I said quickly. "I was wondering how you were." He looked at me, his gaze steady. "I've been better. But talking to you helped. It's strange. I've known you for years, but I feel like I only saw you recently. Does that make sense?" It did, more than I wanted to admit. "I think we both saw something," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. There was a moment where neither of us moved. The air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. Not dangerous, not wrong, but deeply human. We were two people in the middle of our lives, unexpectedly crashing into an honesty we didn't know we needed. Peter broke the silence first. I told my wife I wasn't happy. The words hit me harder than I expected. What did she say? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. She cried. Then she got angry. Then she asked if there was someone else. "Is there?" I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't answer right away. His eyes searched mine, not with guilt, but with something more vulnerable. "There's someone I talk to," he said finally. "Someone who sees me. Someone who makes me feel like I'm still alive." The implication was clear. And yet nothing between us had crossed a line. Not physically. Not even flirtatiously. But emotionally. Emotionally, something had begun the moment he stood in my kitchen that night. "Peter," I said, steadying my breath. "Whatever this is, it's delicate. And it matters. Not just to you, but to me too. And if we're not careful, we could ruin something important." He nodded slowly. "I know. I don't want to hurt anyone, least of all you." That admission made my heart ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Then let's take a breath," I said. "Figure out what this is without destroying everything else along the way." He leaned back, exhaling deeply. "I don't even know what I'm looking for anymore." "Maybe not everything needs to be figured out right now," I said. "Sometimes just feeling something again is enough for a while." We sat there as the shadows grew longer, the silence between us full of emotion neither of us dared name. It was a strange comfort, that quiet companionship. Not romance, not friendship as it once was, something in between. When he left, he touched my hand gently. Just a brush of skin, but it lingered even after he was gone. That night, I lay in bed next to David, who was already asleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind turning over everything. Peter's words, his face, the way my own heart felt lighter and heavier at once. I wasn't falling for Peter. It wasn't that simple. It wasn't lust or rebellion or some desperate need for drama. It was the rediscovery of connection, of meaning, of someone seeing me as more than just someone's wife. The next few days were quieter. I busied myself with small things, organizing the pantry, cleaning out the linen closet. But nothing felt as vivid as that afternoon. And then a letter arrived. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter tucked in an envelope handwritten. It was from Peter. "Clara, I didn't know how to say this without making it heavier than it already is, but I needed to put it somewhere. You've been the only person who's made me feel like I'm not vanishing. I don't expect anything from you. Not a reply, not another conversation. But thank you for listening, for looking at me and seeing someone worth talking to. I just wanted you to know that, in case the silence grows again. Peter. I read the letter 3 times, then once more. I didn't cry, but something inside me softened, and deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. I kept Peter's letter in the drawer beside my bed, underneath a folded napkin and an old bookmark I never used. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not David, not my sister, not even my closest friend whom I usually confided in without hesitation. Something about it felt too tender, too raw to share. Life, on the surface, returned to its usual pace. Morning coffee with David, watering the plants. The occasional dinner with friends where I smiled and laughed and listened to everyone talk about their kids, their hips, their retirement plans. But I wasn't entirely there. A part of me hovered elsewhere, somewhere quieter, more reflective, more alive. Weeks passed before I saw Peter again. It was a community fundraiser at the local park, something David had volunteered us for, passing out drinks and snacks. The sky was clear, the sun warm without being punishing, and laughter drifted around us like music. I was arranging bottles of water on a folding table when I heard his voice behind me. "Need a hand?" I turned, and there he was. In a button-up shirt, sleeves rolled just above his elbows, his hair slightly wind-tossed. For a moment, the noise around us faded. "Peter," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I wasn't planning on it," he said. "But someone mentioned it, and I figured, why not?" We worked side by side for the next hour. Our conversation was light, almost deliberately so. We talked about local news, mutual friends, the terrible cookies being sold at the bake sale. But underneath every exchange was a quiet awareness, like a second layer of dialogue neither of us dared to speak aloud. After the event, when most of the crowd had gone and David was deep in conversation with the mayor's wife, Peter touched my elbow lightly. "Walk with me," he asked. I nodded, and we slipped away unnoticed, following the path along the edge of the park where it grew quieter, shaded by tall trees. "I thought about writing again," he said after a long silence, "but I didn't want to make things harder for you." "It wasn't hard," I replied. "It was honest, and sometimes that's rare enough to matter." He glanced at me. "You didn't respond." "I didn't know how," I admitted. I wasn't sure what a response would mean. He stopped walking and turned toward me. "Clara, I don't know what this is between us. I don't know what I want it to be. But I can't pretend it's not there." My chest tightened. I looked away, staring at a bench nearby, worn and splintered from years of weather. "I've asked myself that too," I said. "What this is, why it matters, why it scares me." He moved a little closer. "I'm not asking you for anything. Not a decision. Not a promise. I just need you to know that what I feel around you is the most honest thing I've felt in years." His words were like warm water over cold skin, soothing and disorienting at once. I swallowed hard. "I'm married, Peter. And you're married too." "I know," he said. "I haven't forgotten. I carry it with me every day." He didn't reach for me. He didn't touch me. But the space between us vibrated with unspoken tension. "I think we're both aching for connection," I said finally. "For meaning. But we need to be careful we're not mistaking that ache for something else." His eyes softened. "You always make sense, even when it hurts." We sat on the bench in silence, watching the breeze rustle the leaves, the late afternoon light filtering through branches in gold streaks. I felt him beside me, solid, real, and yet I also felt the weight of everything that stood between us. Before we parted, he said, "I'm glad I saw you today." I gave a small smile. So am I. That night, David noticed I was quiet at dinner. "You okay?" he asked, pouring more wine into my glass. "Just tired," I said. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I felt a pang of guilt deep in my chest. David was a good man, steady, kind, but sometimes kindness becomes invisible when it's always been there. I sat with that feeling for days, and then one evening I found myself writing a letter. No plan, just instinct. My hand moved before my mind could stop it. "Peter, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about connection, about meaning. I don't have answers, but I know I don't want to lose the version of myself that comes alive when I'm talking to you. Maybe we both need to figure out what that version is and why it matters. Maybe that's all this is, or maybe it's more. I don't know, but I'm not ready to walk away from it just yet. Clara." I didn't mail it right away. I held on to it, reading it over and over, folding and unfolding the paper like a nervous tick. It felt like a confession, even if it wasn't romantic. It was a reflection, a mirror held up to a piece of myself I didn't know I'd forgotten. A few days later, Peter called. Not a message, not another letter. His voice, warm and unsteady, on the other end of the line. "Can we meet?" he asked. And this time, I said yes without hesitation. Ask ChatGPT. We met at the conservatory just outside town, a place filled with orchids and tropical ferns, humid and quiet, like stepping into a dream far removed from real life. I hadn't been there in years. It was a place I used to visit when I needed to think, when the noise of the world felt too sharp, and I wanted something softer to wrap around me. Peter was waiting by the entrance, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes scanning the path until they found me. And when they did, he smiled, not broadly, but with that small, familiar curve that meant more than 1,000 words. "Thanks for coming," he said. We walked slowly down the winding path inside the glass house, the air fragrant and heavy. Every so often, a drop of condensation would fall from the steel frame above, dotting the stone walkway like tiny raindrops. Butterflies floated nearby, silent companions to our quiet steps. I wasn't sure what we were walking toward: closure, understanding, maybe even goodbye. But I knew we were both holding something in our chests that needed air. Peter stopped near a bench tucked beneath an arch of flowering vines. "Can we sit?" I nodded and lowered myself beside him, the scent of jasmine strong in the air. "I read your letter," he said, his voice low, over and over. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. I wasn't asking for anything. I just needed to be honest with myself as much as with you. He turned to face me. "I thought I came to you because I was lost, that I was chasing something missing from my life. But the truth is, I wasn't running from my wife or from my life. I was running from a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore." His words hit something tender inside me. "Sometimes we become strangers to our own hearts," I said quietly. "And we don't even notice until someone holds up a mirror." "That's what you did," he said. "You held up a mirror." I looked down at my hands. "Peter, what we shared, those conversations, that feeling, it mattered. It still does. But I think it wasn't about you and me. Not in the way we thought. It was about seeing something true in ourselves." He nodded slowly. "I've been talking to my wife. Really talking. For the first time in years. I told her everything. Not about us, because I don't think there's an us in the way people assume, but about how I'd shut down, how I stopped being present. Was she angry? I asked. At first, yes, he said. But she cried, too. She told me she'd felt invisible for years, like I was just going through the motions. And now, we're trying. Not to go back to who we were, but to find out who we are now. I smiled, a little sad, a little proud. That takes courage. I wouldn't have done it without you, he said. You reminded me that I still had something worth saving. A silence passed between us, not awkward, not tense, just real. I've thought about you a lot, I admitted. Not in a romantic way, not really, but as a man who saw something in me I hadn't seen in a long time. You made me feel, noticed, and that woke something up in me. He reached over, gently took my hand in his, and gave it a light squeeze. You deserve to be seen, really seen. I hope David sees you, too. He does, I said softly. Maybe not in all the ways I used to want, but I think I've spent too long expecting him to notice things I never say out loud. You're going to talk to him. I already started, I said. Little things. Letting him in again, even when it feels easier to be quiet. The moment stretched between us, warm and full of something deeper than desire, gratitude, perhaps, or respect, maybe even love, in a different form. The kind that exists not to possess, but to lift someone back into themselves. Peter stood first. I think this chapter of whatever this was, it's come to a close. I stood too, brushing my fingers against the wooden bench one last time. It has, but I'm glad it happened. All of it. He leaned in and kissed my cheek, nothing more. Just a press of warmth, a farewell without words. As we walked toward the exit, the sky outside had softened into a golden haze. I felt light, changed, not because I'd lost something, but because I'd found a part of myself I hadn't known I'd misplaced. When I returned home, David was sitting in the den, reading. He looked up and smiled when I walked in. You're glowing, he said. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was. Because even though life would return to its steady rhythm, I knew I'd never drift through it the same way again. Sometimes a person enters your life not to stay, but to remind you who you are. And if you're lucky, you find the strength to carry that reminder forward into the life you already have, more awake, more honest, more whole.